Hello and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And a very warm welcome to episode 23, where we are talking about networking conversation strategies. So let me ask you, how do you feel about networking? Are you somebody who loves these types of networking events, whether they're internal or external? Or are you like a lot of people I know who say, do you know what? I think it's okay, but I don't love them. They feel a bit fake, a bit artificial, and I'm never really quite sure how to approach them. I find that a surprising number of people find networking challenging, and that's true for my clients as well. So, the first thing to say, if you are somebody who's not a massive networking fan, then please don't worry. This is a very common challenge. In fact, I had a client recently who talked about the idea that when she was networking, she almost felt like she was putting on her networking mask. And it really didn't feel like she was being herself. And that's really the biggest challenge. We're often not being ourselves. So how can we approach our conversations in networking in being more us? And how do we do it in a way where we actually also make the most of our connections and relationships, particularly if we are approaching networking with a particular goal? That might be to develop your career. It might be about a next step for you, a promotion, or perhaps you're changing direction. And sometimes with networking, we're actually going into a networking context to really get something very specific. So some advice, an introduction to other people, or perhaps even a way into an opportunity for our career. So it is important to us. And clearly, networking, I think most of us would agree, is a positive thing to do. And so what I'm going to share here today are the conversation approaches to really make it work for you so that you feel more confident the next time that you go to your next networking event, whether that is informal or more formal, or whether that is part of other events that are going on. Equally, these ideas apply whether you are networking internally or whether you're doing that externally. So let's start off with talking about something I'm very passionate about, which is how cultural values impact the networking context. So cultural values, if you've heard me talk about on other podcasts, are our preferences and ways of doing things, how we behave, how we communicate, and these are influenced by our cultural background. Now, we may be very aware of this, or this might be new news for you. But the idea of this is that we have our ways of doing things. And when we meet people at different events, they equally have their cultural values, their preferences of how they like to communicate and interact. So we need to be quite aware of this because we may need to think about how we're adapting our conversation style and even our non-verbal communication. So an example of this is that there is a particular cultural value which is about how expressive and how much emotion do people show. How this applies to networking is that sometimes we might meet people who are very neutral. This means that on the cultural value of expressiveness, they don't show much warmth and natural expressiveness, for example, with hand gestures or facial expressions. And if you're somebody who comes from a very expressive culture, then you might find that hard to connect with that person because you feel that they are perhaps not showing their friendliness or not showing their willingness to be in that conversation. If on the other end of the scale, though, you are incredibly expressive and you're using a lot of nonverbal communication to emphasize what you're saying, For somebody who comes from a more neutral cultural value culture, then actually that feeling of very strong expressiveness can feel quite overwhelming. It might even be judged as not so professional, or perhaps being too excitable, too emotional. So, as you can see, something as simple taking one cultural value can really demonstrate how we need to think about how we adapt, how we're communicating and expressing ourselves. So, that's the first point. Next, let's talk about how do we actually get into conversations. Well, it depends again on the context, but if we're talking about an event, for example, I know that this is something that people often dread, walking into an event, not knowing anybody, and feeling like, how do I get into all the conversations that are already happening around the room? So I think it's really helpful before you get into that room to think about what are your conversation topics? What are your starters? Now, it could be as simple as commenting on the weather, but to be honest with you, that's quite boring. And after maybe a quick few comments on that, you want to move on. So think about what connects you to the other people in that room. If this is an event that's had speakers as well as informal networking, then you could refer to the topics that are being talked about, the speakers, and how they're kind of presenting their views. If this is just more informal networking, it could be about understanding the person's connection to other people in the room, or their professional background. So just think about those conversation starters. And if you get really stuck, then even just commenting about where you are, the venue that you're in, can be a really helpful point. Remember, the key point that we're having here is that we want to create connection. So it's about being genuinely interested in the other person and being you. So relax into it, have fun, and just remember it's a conversation that we're trying to create here. Even if you have an agenda, and even if the person is very different, maybe much higher up in the chain of command, you're trying to build conversations here. The other question I get asked quite a lot is, how do I balance the chat with my own goals? So if you're coming to a networking event with specific goals about who you want to meet, or maybe even you meet somebody there and you realize, fantastic, they are a great connection because they may be able to introduce me to other people, or they may be able to help me with my particular job search, then it's really important to make sure you're balancing the chat with your request. So always start with openness and listening first. Also, make sure you're spending enough time building that relationship and connection before you make any requests. And of course, it's okay to make requests, but also know that you need to do it in a way that is polite and respectful and comes at the appropriate point in that conversation. Now, I've touched on nonverbal communication, but I'm going to build on this, which is I have been in situations in the past where I've been at a networking event and somebody is talking to me, but at the same time, they're not really paying attention to me. How do I know? Well, I think it's really clear when you notice people's eyes moving around the room while they're trying to talk to you. Equally, they're not really trying to focus on what you're saying. So again, think about nonverbal communication. Keep yourself focused on the conversation, on the person or people who are speaking. Use your eyes to demonstrate that you're paying attention. And when it comes to personal space, I mention this because two reasons. One, what is considered the right level of personal space varies from culture to culture. But also, I think sort of even now, sort of when we're haven't done so many live events, so many in-person events for a long time, it's good to have this reminder. So personal space in the UK, where I'm based, and in many other English-speaking countries, is generally an arm's length. So an arm's length away from other people. Now, I really hope that as you go into these conversations, you're having great conversation. But what if you're not? What if you're having a really bad, it's not, the connection isn't quite there? Well, it is okay to know what your conversation exit strategy is. And I often say to people, the best way to think about it is just to come up with some sort of excuse. So that might be about, I must go and grab some food and drink before the next session, or I see somebody I know, I should go over and say hi. But also you can really openly say, you know what, I don't want to dominate your time, and I'm really conscious I should network with some other people here as well, and thank them for their time. So you could be honest there. But assuming all goes well, to close the conversation, clearly it is good to make sure that you try and swap details there and then. And that's particularly important if you have had a good conversation, you want to build that relationship for the future, or even that you have made a request for help, or you kind of realize that this person might be really helpful for the future for your goals. Now, it is absolutely okay to ask for their details. It can also be helpful to ask them if you're okay to connect on LinkedIn, and asking them to spell their name, so you just can make that a connection request straight away in the moment. And then it's really kind of what happens next. Sometimes people forget that actually when it comes to networking conversations, the conversation doesn't stop when the meeting ends. Actually, the magic happens afterwards. So how do we follow up appropriately? The first thing is, it's really important to be in touch within 24 hours. That could be via email, it could be via LinkedIn. And what you want to say is thank you. Thank you for a great conversation. Telling them what particularly you enjoyed about the conversation you had. If you offered help in some way to the other person, or you said you'd take an action for them, make sure you do it, and make sure you really deliver on that. Equally, if they promise something or you have a request for them, you can put that also in your follow-up. Now, hopefully it all goes well and that person replies, but if they don't, I think it's totally okay to follow up again within 7 days. So 7 days later, and just make sure that they've received it, and maybe they've been busy, so making sure that they've seen it as well. So there we go. As we come to the end of this episode, where we've really explored a number of topics to do with networking conversation strategies, let me ask you, how do you feel about your networking approach right now? Is networking very much in your zone of comfort? Or actually, are you feeling a little bit challenged by the idea of going to different types of networking events for whatever your goals are? I would love to know, and I'd love to know actually which of these conversation strategies have been most helpful for you. So feel free to reach out to me. Let me know. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Victoria Reynoldson. And if you find networking particularly challenging and you know it's a key part of developing your career, then get in touch and let's talk about how I can help you. And finally, at the end of this episode, if you have found this particular episode helpful and you think it would be useful to somebody else in your team, a co-worker, somebody that you know would really benefit from hearing this today, then please feel free to share the episode. It'd be really great to share it around. And I'm really passionate about getting this podcast out there as widely as possible around the world. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Victoria Reynoldson, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Cultural Communication Confidence.